Come, settle in. Let the quiet of the room be your fortress, and let my voice be your guide. Tonight, we drift across charts and coastlines, over cold seas and clouded skies, to a moment when weather, wisdom, and will decided the course of history. This is the story of the DoD Day forecast. How a small opening in a stormy Atlantic became the doorway to liberation. Long before the first landing craft nosed toward Normandy's sands, the invasion had a hidden front line. It lay across the North Atlantic, where pressure fell and rose in slow breaths of air, where fronts curled like careful ink on a chart, and where each gust was a messenger. To cross that ocean of air safely, the Allies would need a forecast precise enough to thread a needle in a gale. The invasion was bound not only by strategy and secrecy, but by astronomy and tide. The plan called for first light to reveal the German beach obstacles at low tide, so engineers could clear lanes. It asked for a bright moon for airborne pathfinders, guiding paratroopers and gliders inland. It needed cloud ceilings high enough for bombers to see their aiming points, and winds low enough for parachutes and landing craft to behave. All those conditions come together only in narrow windows. In June 1944, the prime window opened on the 5th, 6th, and 7th. If those days failed, the next alignment of tide and moon would be weeks away. Weeks that could cost surprise. Weeks that could cost lives. At Southwick House near Portsmouth, the Allied command gathered around a long table strewn with maps. The man responsible for reading the sky's intentions was Group Captain James Stagg, a quiet Scotsman with the Royal Air Force and Britain's Met Office. He led a combined British and American team of forecasters who, for days, had slept in snatches and argued in whispers, laying greaseff-penciled fronts over fresh reports. To Stagg came observations from Iceland, Ireland, Scotland, and the western approaches, from weather ships rolling in gray swells, and from upper-air balloons that had climbed into the jetty cold. From those fragments, he had to sketch tomorrow. The Channel is a narrow sea, but a complex stage. The swell can come from one direction, the wind from another, the tide from a third, and the cloud from a fourth. Landing craft are low and flat, and just a little extra wind or wave height can turn a line of soldiers into a line of seasick, delayed men. Paratroopers depend on steady winds and enough open sky to see signal lamps below. Bombers need more than courage. They need a cloud base high enough to identify bridges, batteries, and road junctions. The forecast had to satisfy all three. As June 4th approached, the Atlantic breathed in a deep and unwelcome way. Reports arrived from far out to the west of falling pressure and strengthening winds. A depression was deepening and walking eastward, dragging with it cold fronts, low cloud bases, rain bands, and gale-force gusts. To launch an armada through that would be to fight the sea itself. In the smoke-dimmed rooms of Southwick House, differences in method sharpened the debate. Some forecasters, favoring pattern analogues from past years, argued the storm might pass sooner. Others, reading the latest synoptic maps, saw the front arriving later and lingering. Across those differences, Stagg looked for consensus the way a navigator looks for a lighthouse, hoping for a fixed light in shifting haze. On the night of June 3rd into June 4th, the weather turned against the original plan. Wind rose over the channel. Cloud lowered. Rain marched in sheets. In the early hours, in a cramped conference, Stagg recommended delay. The date, June 5th, the first choice would be too rough for small craft, too blind for the airborne, too risky for bombers. The Supreme Commander listened, and the greatest amphibious force in history held its breath. Thousands of ships idled at anchor under blackout. Troops lay on kit bags, staring at canvas ceilings, rehearsing the plan in their heads one more time. Airfields across southern England, heavy with fuel and anticipation, kept engines quiet. Every hour of postponement increased the chance of discovery. Every hour of patience increased the chance of success. Now came the question behind the question. Was there a break coming? Could there be, inside this larger storm, a short lull a day where the wind dropped a notch, the sea smoothed a little, and the cloud lifted just enough? Stagg and his colleagues sifted the latest signals. From stations on Ireland's Atlantic edge came word of pressure twitching upward after the fall. From ships to the northwest, wind shifts hinted at a ridge following the low. Over Iceland, the upper air pattern suggested a small window might open on June 6th. In the pre-dawn of June 5th, the weather briefing convened again. The room was cold, the map lights soft. Stagg spoke quietly, the way one does when the facts must carry more weight than the voice. The storm, he said, would not allow a safe crossing on the 5th. But if the fleet could hold one more day, conditions on the 6th should improve, winds easing, cloud breaking, rain intermittent, visibility acceptable. Not perfect, but enough. The decision moved, very gently, from atmosphere to history. In that early morning, the Supreme Commander weighed the risks of going against the risks of waiting. He thought of the second window, weeks away. He thought of secrecy evaporating with each delay. He thought, perhaps, of the men already aboard ships, and of the weather's habit of favoring those who act inside its fleeting graces. Then he gave the order to proceed. While the Armada turned its bows toward France, the German weather picture lagged behind. The Allies had better access to Atlantic observations, having more ships at sea and more stations on distant coasts. The Luftwaffe's forecasting relied on sparser data to the west, blinding them to the brief improvement. Many German commanders assumed the storm would continue. Some left their posts inland. Low clouds and poor visibility on the 5th had grounded much reconnaissance. The sea itself kept the secret. At midnight into the morning of June 6th, the weather's promise kept its word, not perfection, but possibility. Over England, cloud broke in patches. Winds over the channel eased one notch from punishing to tolerable. The swell still ran, and small craft would pitch and roll, but they could move. The cloud ceiling was not high everywhere, yet there were holes large enough for pathfinders to see and mark the way. The forecast had delivered the narrow corridor promised. Just after midnight, paratroopers stepped into the dark, trusting silk and training. Gliders followed, creaking through pockets of cloud toward causeways and bridges. Out to sea, thousands of ships shook the night with low engines. Through mist and drizzle, destroyers shepherded long lines of landing craft. Dawn found the beaches. The tide pulled away from obstacles studded with mines and steel teeth. Engineers raced the rising water to blow gaps. The day was hard and the price was high, but the weather window had held. To understand why that window mattered so much, we step back into the mechanics of the forecast. In 1944, meteorologists worked with synoptic charts drawn by hand, using telegraphed observations from ships, stations, and balloons. There were no satellites watching the swirl of cloud tops. No computers running millions of equations overnight. There were only eyes for patterns, minds trained on pressure tendency, and experience with the North Atlantic's moods. A deep low traveling from Newfoundland toward Scotland drags in its train a sequence, a warm front with rising cloud and drizzle, then the warm sector with low cloud and gusts, and finally the cold front with squalls and rapid clearing behind. In early June, those lows often march one after another, their intervals measured in days. The art was to catch the brief ridge in between, when the isobars relax their grip, winds slacken, and ceilings lift. That was the 6th. For the Armada, wind and wave become arithmetic. Too much crosswind on a beaching run, and the flatty-bottomed craft weathercock and stall. Too much surf and ramps buck away from sand, forcing men to jump in deeper water. For the airborne, gusts spread drops wide, scattering units. For the bombers, cloud at 500 feet hides targets, at 1,500 windows open. The forecast sought to keep all three in the tolerable band. A miracle of timing appears when we look a fortnight ahead. Had the invasion been delayed to the next tidal moon window later in June, the Channel would have met the Allies with one of its harshest tempers. A severe storm struck in mid-June, battering the coast, wrecking ships, and snapping sections of the artificial Mulberry Harbor off Omaha. What the 6th allowed, the 19th would have denied. The path opened, then slammed shut. Credit, in meteorology, is rarely a single name, and yet names matter. James Stagg held a role that required both science and nerve. He had to manage competing methods, analog pattern matching on one side and synoptic reasoning on the other. He had to speak plainly to leaders whose decisions carried unimaginable weight. And he had to accept that the atmosphere never signs a guarantee. He recommended a path through uncertainty, and the weather, that day, honored it. There is another name, more distant from headquarters and closer to the edge of storm. On the Atlantic coasts, observers watched the barometer needles and wind vanes through long, wet hours. From such posts on the western fringe of Ireland and beyond came the first tremors of the low's arrival, and then the subtle easing that foretold a break. Each coded report, sent by key or by voice, joined a web of information that supported the decision. Weather is not an enemy or an ally. It is a stage on which human plans either find their rhythm or lose their step. The WWII day forecast reminds us that logistics include the sky, and that courage includes the patience to wait for the right hour. It shows how humble tools a barometer, a pencil, a chart can guide great fleets more surely than bravado. Let us for a moment watch the forecasters at work. One plots isobars lines of equal pressure across the North Atlantic, curving them smoothly through observed points. Another sketches fronts with symbols that look like teeth and half-moons, marking where air masses meet. A third compares pressure tendencies, how fast the barometer has fallen or risen in the last 3 hours, looking for hidden accelerations. On the wall, the upper air chart shows winds at 10,000 feet, steering currents for cloud. In the corner, someone quietly questions, will that occlusion stall or sweep through by midnight? Arguments in such rooms are not ego but method. Analog forecasters search memory and archives for years that looked like this. Synopticians trust the real-time weave of observations. Both want the same thing, reliable guidance, but their tools favor different strengths. In June 1944, analog suggested improvement sooner. The synoptic picture warned of lingering rain and wind. The compromise was not arithmetic. It was judgment. Then there is the sea state, measured not just by wind speed but by fetch and swell. A wind that has run hard for hundreds of miles piles up long, heavy waves that linger even after the gusts ease. The forecasters had to imagine not only what the air would do, but what the water would remember. They had to ask whether a shore-facing swell would combine with tide to make surf too steep for landing craft to control, and whether a cross swell would twist vessels as they turned toward their beaches. For the airborne, cloud and wind create a geometry of risk. Low cloud hides ground beacons and confuses formation timing. Strong winds aloft push paratroopers off their drop zones. Gusts turn glider landings from precise descents into bumpy arrivals. Yet the same broken cloud can also hide airborne armadas from watchers below. The best night is one of broken ceilings, modest winds, and long clear corridors, exactly the sort of day that a ridge behind a cold front sometimes gives. On the morning of the 6th, crews looked up and saw neither a blue postcard nor a solid lid. They saw a patchwork windows of visibility, veils of mist, and stretches of workable sky. That was all the plan had ever asked. In those windows, pathfinders found their marks. In those lulls, landing craft made their runs. On that imperfect, adequate morning, the weather did not conquer. It merely allowed. If you listen closely, you can hear the tools of that forecast even now. The click of a barometer's glass tapped to settle the needle. The scratch of pencil on a plastic overlay. The soft buzz of a radio bringing in a ship's position, wind, cloud, sea state. The quiet voice of a forecaster saying, "There will be a brief improvement." The hush that follows, as those words ripple outward to airfields and harbors. success does not erase the uncertainty that preceded it. The very next weeks would remind everyone how fragile windows can be. Gales returned. They damaged equipment and battered the nascent harbors. They showed, with brutal clarity, that waiting for a perfect day is often a way to miss the only good one. The WWII forecast was not a promise of fine weather. It was a permission to act. There is comfort in that idea, that knowledge and craft can reveal a usable hour inside a bad week. That from many eyes and many minds, one can draw a map across the unknown. That even the largest endeavors must bow to the sky, and that bowing thoughtfully is a kind of strength. Close your eyes now, if you wish, and picture the map room one last time. The channel is painted pale blue. The coast of France is a long arc of tan. Across the Atlantic, the isobars loop like gentle waves. A low here, marked with a bold L. A ridge following, faint but present. The clock hands creep. The door opens. A voice says, "We go." And outside, a wind that would have shoved men back the day before now pushes them forward just enough. Let the idea settle with you as you drift, that a set of careful measurements and a willingness to wait can shape a continent's morning, that a scientist's quiet certainty in a room of doubt can change the weather of history, and that in the long ledger of war and peace, one of the most humane tools is a forecast well made. Rest easy. In the next chapter, we'll step deeper into the people behind those charts, show the teams were formed, how their methods clashed and converged, and the delicate art of briefing leaders when no answer is certain. For now, breathe with the slow rise and fall of an ocean at slack tide, and sleep